it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. Um, Welcome back if you've joined one of our previous webinars. And if you're new, hopefully you gain some knowledge from tonight's topic of verbal operants. Uh, just so you know who you're getting your information from, my name is Natalia Gutierrez. I started out in the field of applied behavior analysis back in 2018 as an RBT in Tennessee. I am from South Florida, but I decided to get away to start my journey in ABA. And then after being in RBT for a couple of years, I decided I wanted to go back to school to become a BCBA. So I headed back to Florida to attend Florida Tech. And in 2022, I got my master's in applied behavior analysis and organizational behavior management. And then I decided to stick around there for a little bit and got tired of it again. So here I am back in Tennessee, working for Tact or Hope as the site director in BCBA in Smyrna. So, what are verbal operants? You guys may have heard of this guy named B.F. Skinner. Uh, he was the force behind behavior analysis and the creator of what we call verbal operants. Um, these verbal operants make up the foundation of language development and are considered the building blocks of communication. So I will be covering each of them individually tonight, and I'll provide some examples. But anytime I say verbal operants, these 7 items are what make up verbal operants. So we have mands, tacts, echoics, motor imitation, intraverbals, listener responding, and under the umbrella of listener responding, we have receptive identification. And lastly, we have match to sample. So I decided that this was a good topic to cover because your child's learning revolves around these items. You may hear your clients BCBA talk about these different verbal operants, and you're like, I'm not really sure what they're talking about, or maybe you're reading over the learning plan and you're maybe a little confused. So BCBAs use assessments like the VB map or ABLES, especially for our younger learners, to determine skill deficits and what to teach during the authorization period. So each authorization period is 6 months. And so every 6 months, we're retesting and to see what progress we've made. If we've made progress, okay, what are the next steps? We refer back to these assessments to then decide what we're going to teach in the upcoming authorization period. And these verbal operants are big domains that we cover throughout your child's learning process. We might also see that challenging behavior is a cause of deficits within these verbal operants. So I might be getting ahead of myself. We're going to be covering mands, which are requests. But if your child has difficulty expressing their wants and needs, they may communicate in the form of property destruction or maybe even aggression. So, say a child doesn't want to play with an item anymore, or they don't want to engage in an activity. Instead of saying, "Hey, I don't want this," or "I'm all done," maybe they start throwing the items instead. Or instead of asking for or requesting for a break, they start engaging in aggression. I will also say that if your child does not communicate vocally, maybe they currently use an AAC device or a PECS book, we can still teach so many skills within these verbal operants. So I don't want you to think that if your kiddo is non-vocal, these don't apply to them. So first we have mands. To mand is to request. Mands allow a speaker to have their wants and needs known to the listener. A mand does not require a vocal response from the listener. So if your kiddo is asking for an item or they say, I want a drink, then a parent, a caregiver, will go get the child a drink and give it to them. It doesn't require any type of vocal response. You would just hand over the drink. Now, if you want to provide vocal praise for saying, for manding, and you're like, oh, thanks so much for asking for a drink and using your words, that's just vocal praise. It's not required though. You would just hand off that item. And then for another example, maybe you guys have been playing a game of chase, and after a bit, you're exhausted and you don't want to play anymore. But your kiddo still really wants to play. They might say, chase me. That's a mand for action. And then to reinforce the mand, you would then chase your kiddo. These are just some other examples. I have made these visuals a long time ago, so I thought I would include it in here for you all. Feel free to screenshot if you'd like. I have these visuals that you'll see throughout the presentation hung up in the clinic, more so for newer RBTs who might get confused with each of the verbal operants and like instructions. But some examples might be to request for bathroom or for break, or they say after your horrible singing, hey, please stop singing. Or maybe they want more of something, so they say more, please. These are all examples to request for an item, to stop an activity or an action. Now we have tact. To tact is to label. This includes labeling items, people, places, or maybe actions. So if your kiddo sees an airplane in the sky and they say airplane, that is a tact. It didn't require an instruction, but it would still be counted as them labeling an item. For another example, we can look from an adult perspective. Maybe you are introducing me to a group of your friends and you say, hey, Natalia, this is John, Sam, Jennifer, and Courtney. That's an example of a tact. You've just tacted all of these people for me. I will say that when we are teaching our early learners and maybe they've just begun in getting services, we will begin teaching tacts by having the kiddo label their preferred items first. That way we can learn through play very frequently. They're interested in, we'll pretend this is a car. They're interested in a car. Hey, what is it? They say car. Oh, now I'm handing over the car. Great job saying car. Now you can play with it. We'll move from preferred items to then teaching them to label family, friends, and the staff that they work with in the clinic. This kind of goes along with some safety skills and like, stranger danger. So do I know this person? If I'm able to tag them, then yes, I know this person. And then from there, we're going to teach them to label everyday items that they might encounter. So items within the clinic, things that they might see in a classroom, items that they might find in their home, in their bedroom, in a bathroom. So here is a visual. You're going to see the term or the letters SD. That's simply just like what we consider an instruction. So the SD, I'm asking, what do you see in the sky? The kiddo will tact and say sun and clouds. Then I might say, what shape is the sun? The tact would be circle. Instruction, how many birds do you see? The tact would be 3. And then what color are the trees? Green. So you can go from a simple instruction like, what is it? Or what do you see? But then you can also get pretty specific and ask for specific shape. What shape is this? What color is this? How many? So quantity. Those could all still be examples of instructions within text. Next, we have echoic. To echo is to repeat sounds or words. So we can also consider this vocal imitation. For our kiddos who maybe can't say whole words, this would be a skill that is important. We start echoics by teaching them like one syllable sounds before we start to teach them to blend things together, blend sounds together to make up a word. But a simple example would be if I were to hear hello, I then say hello. That's an echo, an echoic. With my learners who are first starting out repeating sounds, before I have them say more, I'm going to make sure that they have each of the sounds within the word more. So if they don't have the M sound, okay, great. Let's focus on the M sound, just one syllable first. So I say, and the child repeats, perfect. They echoed. It point-to-point correspondence. It was the exact same sound that they echoed, or that was modeled for them. So example 2, this might get a little more advanced, but I think it's a great example because you can implement this in home. But when teaching your child to mand for a preferred item and they have the skill of echoing, you can say, hey, what do you want? Car. And then they repeat car. Beautiful job saying car. I'm now handing over the car. So we are using echoics to teach a mand. So again, the SD, just the instruction, will typically be say. So it'll be say blank, either the sound or the word. And then the expectation is for the kiddo to repeat that exact sound that was modeled by the person, by the speaker. If the sound, well, my rule that I use for my kiddos is if the sound the client makes is not exactly the same as the model, then I would count it as incorrect. I might have a different type of error correction than some other BCBAs, but I believe for the early learners who don't have a lot of vocal language, it's important to repeat the sound or the word pretty frequently before we count it against them as an error. So I will always repeat it up to 3 times, or they are provided with 3 opportunities to repeat before I count that task as an error. And so if by that 3rd time they still don't say it, that's okay. We're moving on to something else. Now, for motor imitation, this is to imitate an action. There are lots of types of imitation. We can teach object imitation, written imitation, but to go over motor imitation, there are different types. We have gross motor and fine motor. For a lot of our kiddos with gross motor, we're going to focus on actions that they might encounter within like group activities if they're maybe following along to some fun videos during circle time and these videos involve a lot of waving, clapping, or jumping, then it's important that we teach them these imitation skills so that they can imitate the video that they're watching with their peers during a group activity. So to teach it, I would say for gross motor, copy me and wave, and the kiddo would then respond by waving back. I will say, do this and clap. Um, they're only expected to engage in the action. They don't have to vocally respond at all. But the SD or the instruction will always be do this, copy me, try this, plus the action. So the third example would be jumping. I say do this and I jump. The kiddo then copies me and they jump. For fine motor, we often use our fingers. So doing this, 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 those would all be examples of fine motor. So we say good job to the kiddo. We might do a thumbs up to them. We can say, hey, copy me. And then they're going to do a thumbs up back. Now, for object imitation, the teacher might say, hey, copy me, do this or try this, and then move a car down a ramp. The kiddo then will copy by moving their own car down a ramp. Imitation is such an important skill. I wrote here, it's the foundation to imitating peers. If we can teach them to copy, then they're more likely to engage and play with other kiddos. But it is also a very important skill because when teaching a child a new skill, especially if the response is an action, we want to be using the least intrusive prompt possible. So what I mean by that is if I'm teaching a kiddo to if I'm teaching a kiddo their body parts and I say, hey, touch your head, which is another type of verbal operant, listener responding, which we'll get into. But if I say touch your head, they're not responding because they're like, I don't know what my head is. I don't know where my head is. Instead of me physically prompting them using hand over hand and doing this, I'm going to say, hey, touch your head like this. And now I'm providing a model for them. It's a lot less intrusive than having to physically prompt them. But if they don't have the imitation skill, then providing that model for them is useless. And then I'm going to have to go right into using a physical prompt. So to have that motor imitation skill is really, really important because we want to try to promote as much independence as possible. So even though we're maybe providing a model of what the body part is, it's less intrusive. We're not using hand over hand, which is often very aversive for our kiddos. So imitation, one of the foundational, very important foundational skills to have. Here's just another visual. So it says types of imitation would be gross motor, fine motor. Sometimes in speech and OT, they might focus on oral motor imitation or facial imitation. Those are not quite as popular in ABA. But I know if your kiddo doesn't know how to chew or has a difficulty chewing, OTs or speech therapists will focus on motor or oral motor imitation. So again, the SD options or instruction options to use along with the action or the model would be do this, copy me, and try this. So for gross motor imitation, the GMI clap, I would say do this. And then kiddo copies, that's correct. If I were to say try this, but then they copy by doing thumbs down, that would be incorrect. The imitation should be exact. Now moving on to intraverbals. This would involve filling in the blanks of a phrase, answering questions, or maybe even telling stories. I like to think of intraverbals as just engaging in conversation, but it does not always have to be vocal. So For us adults, if you do a lot of texting, texting would count too, because that's still engaging in a conversation. So, how we start teaching intraverbals would be to fill in the blank for songs like nursery rhymes. But then moving from the songs, we will go into animal sounds. So moo says the, kiddo says cow. You can also flip that and say the cow says, they say moo. You can teach actions by filling in the blank. So you brush your, they say either hair or teeth, both would be appropriate. And then something that is super important, especially as they make progress with those early programs, would be to answer personal questions. So their name, their age, their family members' names, especially parents or whoever the caregivers are, because if I always think safety skills, if your kiddo elopes from you in a store and some stranger approaches them, and is trying to help them by finding you, and they say, hey, what's your name, or what's your mom's name, does your child know how to answer those questions? Those are really important. And then from there you can just start teaching more WH type questions or answers. So here we have some more examples for filling in the blanks. We have tie your, kiddo says shoes. Then you say the itsy bitsy, kiddo says spider. You can teach functions. So scissors are for, the blank would be cutting. With questions, you have what goes with bat. You're teaching now association. The kiddo says ball. Hey, what's your last name? Kiddo says Johnson. In these little bubbles, it just says, hey, how's your day going? Oh, it's going well. How's yours? It's really simple, but that is what is considered intraverbals, just conversation. Now we have listener responding. This is placing a demand and the kiddo responding in the form of an action. So it does not require a vocal response. For listener responding, it doesn't really require materials either. So maybe the teacher says, hey, go line up at the door. The students then go line up at the door. That is a perfect example of responding correctly for a listener responding task. Maybe the caregiver or parent is trying to teach them to touch body parts because that's a prerequisite to engaging in a fun activity like head, shoulders, knees, and toes. So you say, hey, touch shoulders, and they use both hands to touch their shoulders. Some more examples would just be stomp feet, they stomp their feet. You say wave, they wave. You say jump, they jump. These are just more specific instructions versus where for imitation, we say do this, copy me, and such. Listener responding can be more specific. Now, under listener responding, we have receptive identification. This does involve stimuli or items, materials. To teach receptive identification, we often start pretty simple by using maybe a few cards on a table. And for this first example, I have 3 color cards. So I have red, blue, and pink laid out on the table in front of the client. And I say, hey, point to red. The instruction is more specific because I'm saying point to. So the expectation would be to point to the correct color. So then the kiddo points to the red card. Another example maybe you guys are at home playing with cars and you say, find the blue truck. The kiddo would then touch or pick up a blue truck from from the box of vehicles. Um, Here you'll see that you can get pretty specific with your instruction. Again, you can say find blue, the blue circle. Okay, cool. They touch the blue circle. Maybe you have these really little figures on the table and you say, hey, hand me the dog or give me the dog. The expectation would be that they pick it up and give it to you. Another example would be touch car. They touch the car with their finger or their hand. Now, if they start playing with it and they're like up in the sky and, starting to play around, okay, well, we're doing a lot more than just touching. We're now playing with the car. But then we say point to fries. Okay, pointing to the fries. I'm scanning the array. I'm pointing to the correct item. And then the other one, grab baseball. Okay, picking it up. You didn't say to give it to you, so I'm not going to hand it to you. I'm just grabbing the baseball. And last, we have match to sample. I don't have a fun visual for this, but I have little examples off to the side. Matching identical and not identical stimuli. This is what is part of MTS. And this could affect different sensory systems. So you can use match to sample for sight, sound, taste. How we begin teaching it might be with a shape sorter or a shape form box, pictured all the way at the bottom on the right hand side. And they pick up the star block and they match it and put it into the box with the corresponding shape. But moving away from that, we can use objects or picture cards. And so in the first example, if I lay out a picture card of a dog, cat, cow, and fish, then I have a second copy of all of those items. But I say, hey, match. And I hand over the picture, the identical picture of the dog. They're going to take the card from me and then match it to the identical picture laid out on the table. So there's still an array to scan over, but the SD or the instruction is always match plus handing over the card or the object that they're expected to match. You can also teach associations. So if I were to lay out a picture of a card, baseball, shoes, and snow, and I hand over a picture of socks and say, hey, match, they're going to match the sock card to the shoe card. So along with teaching associations, you can have them do sorting categories. Puzzles is another big program within matching. So you wouldn't quite start with a jigsaw puzzle. You would maybe do an inset puzzle. And then more advanced is a jigsaw. And then you just increase the number of puzzle pieces. And at the top, we have it's still matching. They're putting those little shapes together to create a bigger picture. So kind of a puzzle, but not really, but still involves matching. They have to match the shape to the picture on the board. I don't have a fun visual for this one, but that is all for verbal operants. Kind of an abrupt ending there, but I would love to see if you guys have any questions. Maybe you are interested in some of your clients' specific programming and you're like, oh, I don't quite understand this. Maybe I can try to explain it a little further. These verbal operants don't include daily living skills or anything like that. So your child might have a lot more programming um, that they're working on, like toilet training and stuff, but that just wouldn't be included in verbal operants. But if you do have any questions, now's the time to ask. If you want copies of, I see a question coming through. If you want copies of the visuals, then please email me. This is my email labeled here, and I can send them over to you. Let me open up the chat. Okay. Do all goals outside of daily living skills fall under verbal operants? No, we have, I would say that a lot of the prerequisite skills correlate to verbal operants, but you might hear BCBAs talk about DTT versus NET, and NET is naturalistic. So this could involve like group instruction and stuff like that. But I would say that this is a lot of our prerequisite skills come from verbal operants. My kiddo is really good at all of these operants, but unsure how to help support full sentence structure for back and forth dialogue. Okay. Love that you brought that up. So your kiddo is more advanced. I Can your kiddo read? I would say to focus on echoics. You can practice by providing a model of a full sentence. I know that for one of my kiddos, the expectation has only been, yes, but simple books. Okay. The expectation has been to mand using only one or two words. And for a program coming up in under our echoics verbal operant, it is to model or have her echo 3 words, and then from 3 words we're doing 4, 5. So I would start off with using fewer words and then build on that. You don't want to go too far and go from only 2 words to 6. You're going to have to build up to that. Okay. If they can read, you can also help. Instead of doing it by echoics, you maybe could start out having them read uh, a few words and then building on the sentence by that. But sentence structure can be a little difficult. I will say I work primarily with the really young ones. So I haven't had to do a whole lot of that type of teaching. My learners are just starting to talk. But that would be a great discussion to have with your BCBA. You're welcome. Do the type of goals have any correlation with getting authorized for services? Yes. Maybe I'm not quite understanding the question too well, but the goals that your BCBA comes up with should come from some type of assessment. So earlier I had mentioned VB-MAP and ABLES. I love ABLES, so I know for that assessment, each of these verbal operants is a domain within that assessment that I pull programs from. And then yes, those programs and the treatment plan that I have written up does have to get approved by insurance. And so they are part of the authorization. Okay. The question, okay, so I might not be using the right language. Every 6 months, we're anxious as to whether or not we'll get cleared through insurance for the next 6 months. Okay. Oh yeah. If maybe your kiddo does really well within the verbal operants, but the maybe we see an increase in behavior or something like that. Unfortunately, and if your kiddo doesn't engage in a lot of behavior, it's going to be harder to uh, request like full-time hours, especially if their skills are kind of up to speed with their age. The skills that we choose should be age appropriate. If we're going like above and beyond, maybe we won't get approval for all of the hours that we have requested. So we do have to be careful there. Everything that we teach should apply to everyday life, but also so that they're caught up with the similar age peers. Um, it is likely that a lot of their programming comes from some of these verbal operants. Anyone else have questions? Thank you guys for participating. I love that you're asking questions. If you don't want to ask any questions on the chat, you can definitely reach out to your child's BCBA, or I can also be in touch with them if you have specific questions. You can email me. I could always respond or forward that email, and have a discussion with your client's BCBA. Like, hey, these are the topics that I covered tonight, and this was the question that I received. So please feel free to contact me.
Okay, so if I think if we're not going to have any, if we're done with questions, I'm sorry, my dogs have been barking in the background. That's why I've been kind of absent. But if we're done with questions, please feel free to put more in the chat if you have one, if you just thought of one. If not, feel free to email Natalia. We did record the session tonight and we will get that up on our website, and I will try and get that emailed around to everyone in a couple days, just so you have the link for it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.